and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Havens.
Great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we proclaim the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. It is Current Events Wednesday, and our guest today is Dr. Carrie Gress, author of The Anti-Mary Expose, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. Before we bring Dr. Gress in, quick news item from today. It was reported this morning that YouTube permanently deleted the LifeSite News channel on YouTube, which had over 300,000 followers. The Station of the Cross, the Catholic media network that produces this show, also received word this morning from YouTube that we have been suspended from posting any videos or live streams to YouTube for 1 week due to speech that YouTube deemed to be misinformation that was apparently aired Monday on another network program, Mother Miriam Live. So for the next week, you can find live streaming video of this show, The Simple Truth, on my YouTube channel, Jim Havens, and you can always find our live stream on the Simple Truth Facebook page and the Station of the Cross Facebook page, and also the Station of the Cross Rumble page. Rumble is another up-and-coming video platform, so you can find us in all of those places. It's a great opportunity to really push back when these things happen, and to make sure that you are subscribed with every way that you can help put more promotion towards what we're doing. Obviously, as we're proclaiming the truth of Jesus and His Catholic Church, and it becomes more and more of a threat to the advancing agendas of the dictatorship of relativism, we can expect more conflict coming our way in the form of big tech censorship. So we want to learn how to best navigate all of this and make the most of it as an opportunity. And it seems that just using it as a way to say, okay, well, let's support all of these good things that seem to be facing all of this suppression at this point. It seems to be a good way to push back, is to support it all the more. And our guest today is a great example of how to do just that. Dr. Gress, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So your book, The Anti-Mary Expose, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity, recently experienced some big tech censorship. It seems to me that perhaps better than anyone I've seen, you have done a terrific job of flipping the attempted suppression into an opportunity to promote your book in a big way. What is your view of what big tech is up to right now, and how have you made the most of the opportunity in response to the attempted suppression of your book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can say all of it has been sort of unwitting. I didn't intend to sort of fight this back with any kind of valiant effort. I just am not that strategic of a thinker. So I think that there's definitely a lot of Holy Spirit going on here. But the book was actually banned from Facebook Marketplace, and Instagram Marketplace was the initial issue. And there was some letter, to the gift shop, Guadalupe Gifts in Florida, that was actually trying to post it, and there was some note that said that it was violating their policies. And so anyway, they attempted to appeal it, and eventually I don't think they ever heard from Facebook. They were just able to actually re-admit it to their store. But in the meantime, people just were angry when they heard about this and saw this. This was 4 days or 5 days after Biden's inauguration, and it just seemed like people wanted a way to respond to this. And of course, a banned Catholic book was a great way to do that. So people were amazing and just bought it. They it completely sold out, both on Amazon and at my publisher and at my site and elsewhere. But what was strange was then Amazon actually, how when an Amazon book goes out of stock, usually the buttons are there where you can say, say temporarily out of stock. It will ship, March X, Y, and Z, or whenever it's supposed to ship. They'll give you that information. Well, they actually took those buttons off, so you couldn't, in fact, keep purchasing it. You could only buy it through a third-party seller. And, of course, my publisher kept trying to reach out to them and say, what's going on? And they would reinstate it for like an hour, and then they would take it down again. So anyway, it could have been a glitch, but I think all of these things together, it was really eyebrow raising, because it's a 2-year-old book. This is not a brand new book. This is not brand new content, and yet somehow it was being, strange things were happening to it. But the biggest reality was that, I just started talking about why it could have been targeted. And much of it has to do, of course, with the subtitle, talking about this idea of toxic femininity is pretty, you're not supposed to talk about that in our culture. Men are the ones that are at fault for just about everything. And so I think that had a lot to do with the current situation. And so it's been a great opportunity to really talk about this book, and how even in the book I explain, this is kind of the playbook of how the culture has been so decimated and destroyed. And much of that is because this group of elite women that I have called the matriarchy, and the men that work with them are really trying to silence certainly women like me, but you can also see it throughout the culture. Anyone that disagrees with them is silenced or sidelined, or they find some way to minimize their opinion. So I think that's been kind of the ironic part about it, is just to see, this book is the playbook for how they're destroying the culture, and that they're using those seemingly exact same tactics to silence this book as well.
Yeah, terrific. So we're going to use the opportunity today to help expose that playbook, and also proclaim the reverse playbook, the good news that we really need to hear and understand, and to live. So, but first, where is the best place for people to find your book right now? Would it be at the publisher's website, Tan Books?
Yeah, Tan Books is a great place to get it. They have free shipping on orders over $10, and that they have copies on hand. So that's the best place to find it. If people want signed copies, they can go to my website at theologyofhome.com. As an alternative, if you want to get it signed for your daughter, or sister, or brother, or whomever. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so getting into, I guess, the playbook that is the bad news, right, of what has gone wrong over the past 50, 60 years. You say in the book that there are important points that everyone ought to know here about the battle lines that were drawn in the 60s that form the backdrop of how many women think about themselves today. What do you think would be some of the best to make sure that we get out right now on the most important points that people ought to know about what was done back then?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the most important thing is to just recognize how much we have been manipulated, both by an ideology that's a combination of two different things. So part of it, what was going on the 1960s and 70s, was really women who were openly, although people probably didn't realize it, openly using a lot of Marxist thought and Marxist ideology. And they were also blending it with a lot of the occult. I've come to see, pretty easy to see, anytime Christianity and Judaism are weak, the occult just fills in. It's like the jungle, the weeds just come in, and that's what fills the gaps. So we can see this, I call it a deadly cocktail, really, of these two elements, the occult and Marxism, that have just formed the backbone of what radical feminism has fed us in the 1970s and still continues to feed us. So what's interesting, too, is just to even see how effective their arguments have been, that they haven't actually had to change their footing or their talking points very much. You can still see Hollywood, when there was all this issue about, states like Georgia and Alabama and others sort of pushing back on abortion. The big issue was always, it would come back to woman's choice and, the same exact rhetoric without any real recognition that the science has changed since the 1970s, that women do regret their abortions, that there are people that would have made a different choice if they had been better informed. So anyway, it's just interesting to see this pattern that, you've got these starlets in Hollywood who are making the exact same arguments their mothers and grandmothers made, decades ago. So yeah, I think it's when you start seeing it. In fact, a good friend of mine, when the book first came out, said, when you see the anti-Mary, you can't unsee it. So yeah, I think it's just a prevalent piece that when you start looking at how they've manipulated the culture, it's very evident.
Mm-hmm. Help us to see that anti-Mary that defines toxic femininity. How can we see this image of the anti-Mary? What do we look for? What do we see?
Well, what jumped out at me, and the whole idea came to me when I was writing my book called The Marian Option, and I was looking at how just the manifold ways Our Lady has influenced culture and helped Christians and saved civilizations. Certainly Our Lady of Guadalupe is this profound example of it in terms of the number of people that came into the church from that, somewhere between 4 and 10 million people. But the bigger thing is just really see that the culture hasn't just kind of listed a little bit to the left. It hasn't just kind of moved slightly away from whom Our Lady is, but it's actually it's diametrically opposed to who she is. And we can see this certainly. The life issue is the easiest way to see it. But you also have this distortion of womanhood, and we see it now more than ever, kind of this erasing of womanhood. And much of that has to do with this idea, the inception of it, where women were believed to be inferior to men, and they had to become like men in order to become happy. So that's the real seed of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good. When we get back from the break, we're gonna delve into this quite a bit more. And really, when we're listening to Dr. Gress here, one thing that jumps out to me when she talks about being diametrically opposed, I do think back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where we hear, "I will put enmity between you and the woman," talking about Satan, that ancient foe who is real and is with us, and that complete and total opposition. And so we're going to get into that when we get back. What are the demonic influences here, the demonic underpinnings of all of this? And we're going to look at Mary as well and see the beauty that we are called to, and specifically that authentic femininity. We'll be right back on The Simple Truth.
This is Franciscan Media's Saint of the Day for February 10th. Today we celebrate Saint Scholastica. Twins Scholastica and her brother Benedict were born in Italy in 480. Little is known of their early life, though we do know that brother and sister were separated when Benedict left home to study in Rome. Years later, when Benedict established a monastery at Monte Cassino, Scholastica used his rule to found a religious community for women 5 miles away. The two visited each other annually. Because women were not permitted inside the monastery, a nearby farmhouse became their meeting place. There, brother and sister would spend hours praying and discussing spiritual matters. Around the year 542, they had their final meeting. Sensing her death was close at hand, Scholastica begged Benedict to stay with her until the next day. He protested that he couldn't spend a night outside the monastery without violating his community's rules, but a severe thunderstorm broke out and prevented him from leaving. Scholastica considered it God's answer to her prayer. Brother and sister parted the next morning. 3 days later, Scholastica died. She was buried in the tomb Benedict had prepared for himself. There's more about the saints along with inspiration and Catholic resources at our website, saintoftheday.org. From Franciscan Media, this has been Saint of the Day.
Hello, this is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. Doing pro-life work is not simply a response to a cause or a movement, an ideology, or a political platform. It's a vocation and a spirituality which shapes our pro-life activity and keeps us rooted in God amidst that activity. Learn more about this pro-life spirituality and how you can make a public commitment to live it at priestsforlife.org. This is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. We are blessed today to have Dr. Carrie Gress with us. She is the author of a fantastic book that is out there right now that is it's exposing toxic femininity, and it is giving us the antidote, right? It's called The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. It's getting a bit of a resurgence right now, published in 2019. And this is a message that I'm so glad it is getting a resurgence, and that it does seem that the Holy Spirit is guiding that very well. I do want to encourage people to go get that book wherever they can find it. Tan Books is one place where you can go, and another place is it theologyofhome.com. Is that right, Dr. Gress?
That's right. Yep. Okay,
terrific. Now, where we left off, I wanted to jump in here. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says this in paragraph 391. It says, behind the disobedient choice of our first parents lurks a seductive voice, opposed to God, which makes them fall into death out of envy. Scripture and the Church's tradition see in this being a fallen angel called Satan or the devil. The Church teaches that Satan was at first a good angel made by God. The devil and the other demons were indeed created naturally good by God, but they became evil by their own doing. But this is the original enemy that continues to come after the children of light, the children of God, that we are called to be by nature of our baptism, to be brought into union with Jesus, to share the very life of God, that Jesus would make us sons and daughters in him of the Father by the Holy Spirit. This is the glory to which we are made, but we do have an enemy that doesn't want us to freely make use of this gift of free will we've been given to receive the love of God and to love him back and to live our life accordingly. How are the demonic underpinnings of this toxic femininity, as you call it, which is a great way to think of it, especially since the popularized phrase toxic masculinity? How do you look at the demonic in this, and how he's really ultimately the one that is behind all of this?
Yeah, well, I think part of it starts with just the recognizing the reality that what's happened. The family's pretty much been decimated. Women themselves are incredibly unhappy. I think this is one of those details that gets, shoved under the rug quite a bit, where the narrative is supposed to be that, women are getting happier and more opportunity, and this is helping them, and, all of that. And yet, if you look at, what I call the happiness metrics, things like suicide rates and divorce rates, STD rates, depression, substance abuse, all of these things are pointing to some incredibly unhappy women in our culture. So I think that's certainly the fruit of it. But it does go back to, again, like I was saying, sort of this Marxist, occultish kind of blend. And, at the heart of that was really this effort to destroy the family, but to do that through sexual license, by promoting homosexuality, promoting abortion, promoting prostitution, all of these kinds of things that I talk about in the book. Kate Millett is one of the women that was a huge proponent of liberalizing all of these things, and had a group of women that she would repeatedly say this litany of sorts that included a desire to see all of those things happen in the culture. And so it's interesting to think back in the 70s how these women, are promoting this kind of thing, because all of these things were really not part of the culture at all. And yet now they're very much part of the fabric of our culture. So it's amazing to see just how incredibly successful they have been. But you can also see the demonic elements. One of the chapters that I go into extensively is I talk about this demon named Lilith, and when I first started researching this book, I thought, I hope I find enough information, to make my argument. And I spent 2 years researching it, and I certainly found plenty. And I was so grateful when I was done with it, because there was just so much, and it was so depressing and awful. But the Lilith character was one that really caught my eye, because I had heard of the Lilith Fair, which Sarah McLachlan had gathered a bunch of female musicians for this music festival a couple of years in a row. And then there was this Lilith Fund that was set up in Houston after the terrible hurricane went through there. That was for women that wanted to get a free abortion. And so it's also very prevalent in feminist literature, this idea of Lilith. And I thought, well, what's Lilith? So when I looked into it, basically Lilith is this older than our own scriptures kind of story that goes back to ancient Egypt and whatnot. She's mentioned in the book of Isaiah, But it's basically if you wanted to understand what she does, she seduces men and she kills babies. That was the quickest description I found of her. And even the word lullaby comes from people praying against Lilith to protect their children and their families. James Joyce called her the patron saint of abortion. She's painted in Michelangelo's work. There's stories about her. George MacDonald wrote them, and the author of Fiddler on the Roof wrote a story about her. So it's definitely a character that's come up over and over again. And yet she is really considered to sort of be this woman that fought the patriarchy. She was considered to be the wife of Adam and fought Adam, wouldn't be submissive to him. And so that's why she's heralded. And yet I've talked to an exorcist about her, and she's very much has a role in demonic possession and whatnot. So anyway, all of this is sort of swirling around in radical feminism. And I think women just have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And so as a result, we see Wicca right now has actually more adherents than there are Presbyterians. So it's very much growing and becoming something that's very popular. And again, because women don't have the right kind of faith formation, they're falling into it very, very easily because it's been made to look attractive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's amazing too that the lies behind all of this, that they're not more easily seen when you look at how evident it ought to be when you do look at the symptoms of what's going on. I mean, abortion is a very good example. This lie of abortion, which has killed now almost 62 million preborn children. I mean, who knows, countless amounts with abortifacients and everything else. But when we think about this lie, I mean, it flips femininity, it flips womanhood, it flips motherhood into the exact opposite, where it's deceived women into thinking that if they're going through challenges when they're pregnant, that the problem is the child, so much so that kill the child and you're going to get rid of the problem. And we know that's just a lie. We know that it is not true. It is exploiting, it's gravely exploiting pregnant moms in need for profit. And when you spend time on the front lines in pro-life work, you find out very quickly that these moms are truly being deceived in many ways, where they actually want to love their children, but they're being told this lie and they're believing it and they're being deceived by it, when their hearts are truly naturally made to love that child. And we do, as we try to explain to these moms when we meet them in their hour of need on the sidewalks, as we're ministering to them outside of abortion centers, we will say, look, that's the number one thing we're trying to do, is to help them to see their child as a human being worthy of love, and that their problems, let's identify what the problems really are. It's not the child, and then let's actually work on what those problems are. Otherwise, you're going to go into this, you're going to buy the lie, the child is going to be killed, and you're going to have greater problems and all the other problems you had on top of it as well. So it's such a clear lie, but it's so baked into our culture, even our medical establishment, our education system, our media, everything. And now we've got the so-called transgenderism in sports, where it ought to be, it's so cartoonish almost in being so outlandish. How are people not seeing these symptoms and waking up that there is a big lie at the heart of all this?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And it's interesting to look at the ideology there and see that those foundational lies are certainly that our children are an obstacle to our happiness, and our husbands are an obstacle to our happiness. And even any claim that we have to being feminine is actually an obstacle to our happiness. I mean, even it's interesting to look at what these women were trying to get at, and it really was this sort of enshrinement of femininity that they wanted to get. And Gloria Steinem just published a book when she turned 80 a couple of years ago, and she said, she finally got to this point where she was genderless, and that's what she had, was striving for her whole life. So the radical feminist movement has actually just been the bedrock and the foundation for what we're seeing with LGTB movement. It's just the exact same ideology. The amazing thing, of course, though, is that it's sort of, for women that didn't realize where it was leading them, it's been shocking to them to see what it's doing to women's sports and what it's actually doing to womanhood. But it's all of the same cloth in terms of that, the core piece is we want to help people, or we want people to believe that they can change their human nature. And of course, we know that doesn't happen. You don't change all that deep-seated DNA and all that cellular level content that tells the body if it's male or female. And those things can't be wiped out. Hips and elbows and, Adam's apples, all those things don't go away. So it's an amazingly, you're right, there's just this pack of lies that have been packaged so well. And unfortunately, I think as the church, we haven't done enough to push back on it. I think we spent an awful lot of time making amazing arguments, and we have a lot of really great ones, but we haven't found a way to present them back into the culture with the effectiveness that they've used. And this is why we sort of have this sense that every other person must be LGBT, and without recognizing that 20 to 25% of the culture is, or of the population is actually Catholic, and it's about 3%, 2 to 3% that's actually LGBT, because their voices are so loud, and they've done such an amazing job of making it a trendy, hip point, to be involved in at this point in culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to drill down on that in just a moment. But first, I do want to recommend also for people, if they aren't aware of this book by Sue Ellen Browder, Subverted, a very good testimonial book where she really is a whistleblower of what happened in the so-called sexual revolution and the women's movement. The tagline on this book is "How I Helped the Sexual Revolution Hijack the Women's Movement," and she goes down in her explanation there of how she used to work for Cosmo magazine. She was this Cosmo girl, and she was basically selling lies. She admits to it and says that she would make up stories. This is what they would have her do. She'd make up stories about how it was so liberating to live in this sexually licentious way, and talk about, just make up stories about women who were involved in all sorts of these grave sins and acting like the fruits of it were good. And she would pass it off as if it was nonfiction, and they were all made up stories. And so we know this. We can see this in the media, in many movies and shows as well. Characters sin, and then we see that the fruits are good, right? This is fiction, right? The truth is that when we sin, there are negative consequences to it. And so we need to really look at what the truth is and to expose those lies for what they are. Dr. Gress's book does a great job at that. I do want to get into the good news of femininity, of authentic femininity, and look at that perfect model, Mary, as well, when we get back. And also, I think this is going to intrigue some people. I want to pick Dr. Gress's brain as soon as we get back. First, though, on just the question she answers, she makes this point in some of her writings about how it's not just enough just to try to battle within this world of feminism, but also to actually just present the truth we have on its own, the Catholic truth, right? The truth that we have, not to try to actually package it and try to sell it to feminists in this certain way, but just to share with them the good news that we have. So she'll say it more eloquent than that and explain what it all means when we get back on The Simple Truth. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Jezu, ufam Tobie.
Jesus, I trust in you. This is Rick Paolini
And Father Jacek Mazer.
Mercy is the form that God's love takes when it overflows His divine life and pours out upon His creatures.
It's a great message for Lent, but also for any time of the year. It's a message of hope.
Tune in for Divine Mercy in My Soul. We'll be delving into the diary of St. Maria Faustina every Sunday morning at 11.
And catch the encore presentation every Tuesday evening at 8.
Here at the Station of the Cross, we proudly bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners through radio and mobile devices, and we're grateful for the feedback we've received.
I grew up Catholic Church, haven't been in the Catholic Church for decades, but I'm in the process of working my way back for the simple reason that I needed a place to listen to pro-life, pro-family messages. Catholic radio is it. It's a place to hear that message without all the political bias and all that's going on News Talk Radio.
It changed my life.
It's the only station I turn on.
The Catholic station is an answer to prayer.
It just couldn't be more fulfilling.
It's helped me learn more about the faith, and it's helped me to deepen my faith.
faith as a result of that.
It's on continuously in my house, day and night. You can't imagine how much I receive from that channel.
If you've been blessed by listening to the Station of the Cross, let us know. Call 1-877-888-6279, extension 112. Then share your testimonial with us.
Oftentimes, it is easy to think that we are facing an upward battle when it comes to fighting abortion. But our Lord reminds us that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Your faithful dedication will help us make abortion unthinkable in this country. Human life is sacred. Think about it. CoalitionForLife.com.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Our guest today is Dr. Carrie Gress, author of The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. You can find that book at tanbooks.com. You can also go to the website theologyofhome.com, and you can also get an autographed copy of the book there. Dr. Gress, you also have articles on your website at carriegress.com, and one of those articles makes this point. It says this: what is curious, however, is that many Catholics are unafraid to try to engage radical feminism on its own turf by trying to reinvent a feminism that can satisfy even the most dogged or secular feminists. While contributions have been made about the essence of womanhood, these many efforts have resulted in the splintering of feminism into so many camps that few can keep track of them all. End of quote. Unpack that a little bit more for us. I mean, people can say feminism and mean a million different things by it. How should we be looking at the word feminism and how to even talk about it and to present the truth within that framework or to that framework?
Right. Well, the first thing I want to mention, actually going back to your comments before the segment, I actually interviewed Sue Ellen Browder for my book. And when she was inventing those stories for Cosmo, she said there were two things that the Cosmo girl could not be. She could not be a virgin, and she could not be a mother. So it was fascinating, of course, because Our Lady is, of course, the Virgin Mother. You know, these are the natural ways through which women sanctify themselves, and so that's why the real attack is on both of those elements. But yes, I think all of this bleeds very easily into the question of, well, what do we do about feminism? And I think that there's this really deep desire in women to reach out to other women, to try and find some common ground and sort of feel like there's a way to say, we're in this together, even though we disagree on these various points. And that's, what a lot of people that call themselves Catholic feminists have done. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of these people that have written in that vein. But I think that it really does become problematic because, of course, like you said, there's so many different definitions of feminism now, and it's been drained of all of its real meaning. I mean, it could mean pro-woman, but what I mean by pro-woman and you mean and what Gloria Steinem means by pro-woman are very, very different things. So I think that that's the big challenge, is when you don't have a common ground to really even talk about something in a way that people understand, it's very hard to build on that. The other problem, too, I think, is that it also automatically sort of separates out women away from the family, away from their children, away from their husbands. It sort of puts them in this victimhood status. But then there's this natural barrier or struggle that ensues sort of between the sexes and between the generations that I think is also problematic. But the bigger point, too, is even just to recognize what the church has taught about women. I mean, it's sort of ironic that radical feminism is so against the church in light of the fact that it's from Jesus and it's from devotion to Mary. That's really where the development of this idea that women have equal dignity to men came from. So to try and sweep them out of any kind of discussion, it's just kind of absurd, because it didn't come from secularism. It didn't come from any other world religion. But the church, obviously we have so many people that, we're all sinners. People have lived it imperfectly, lived out their relationship between men and women. But the church has always done an amazing job of helping us understand the value of women and the value of men and the value of the family as an intact unit. So that there isn't a need for something called feminism to actually inform the intellectual tradition. The tradition is very long, it's very involved, it's been very much influenced by great saintly women and men. And we see when people are actually striving towards holiness, these elements melt away and love sort of permeates these relationships, versus the constant emphasis and look at where's the drama in these relationships. So anyway, I just think I've moved away from the word in terms of using it myself, because I just think that there's so many problems with it that it's not helping. And, it doesn't even make sense actually to sort of go down that vein. I mean, you wouldn't try and say, I'm going to be a neo-Nazi or a different kind of Nazi so that I can convince the Nazis not to be Nazis. So you might think that that's kind of an extreme example. You could say the same thing about the mafia or communists, but we don't try and argue people out of things that way. But I think the difference is, of course, the big difference is, of course, actually, if you look at feminism, it's actually been a lot more deadly than these other ideologies. It's just been very kind of white-gloved in terms of its deadliness. But it's motivated, I think, again, it goes back to this idea that women want to be able to find a place where they can relate to other women. And radical feminism has also done an amazing job of making those of us who don't agree with it look like we're doormats. So it's that desire to sort of say, no, we're not doormats. We agree with you on a lot of these things. But I just think it raises a lot more problems than can be solved by going down that avenue of embracing an ideology.
Right. Yeah, we can almost be too clever for our own good in a certain way there when we have the treasure, right? Jesus has revealed this to us. The church has handed it down to us for 2,000 years, authentically transmitting it to us. We've got the wealth of great saints, St. John Paul the Great, what he has written about women to help us to really see the feminine genius and to understand and I wish he's written as much about men, quite frankly, to help men to understand masculinity, authentic masculinity. But let me just give you an opportunity here just to proclaim the good news. Your book certainly fleshes it out in a very much fuller way, obviously, than what we have time for here. But as far as what is essential to you and to share right now for men and women listening, how do you proclaim the truth that we need to hear about authentic femininity?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because writing the book, The Anti-Mary, actually is what has led to my next two books, Theology of Home 1 and Theology of Home 2. Those books were really a positive or maybe a way of going on offense. I think as Catholics, we spend a lot of time playing defense and trying to protect the truth, but we don't actually take our own story and present it to people in a beautiful and compelling way, because we do have an amazing story. And that's what I did with these next two books with my co-author, Noelle Mehring. Our books are like coffee table books, and they have gorgeous images. We joke about how the images are all those pictures you're not really supposed to see in culture anymore. We've got dads who look very competent, and we have lots of kids, and we've got pregnant women, and all of these people look happy and healthy instead of cowering in their doormathood or whatever you want to describe it as in the culture. So I think that's been probably the biggest fruit in my life, and has been. I have a PhD in philosophy, and I thought if I can argue people into believing this and understanding this, and can't tell you how many times that just didn't work for me, and so it's been this lifelong journey of just begging God, how do I reach women? And so I saw how has the culture been destroyed? These women weren't reading Marx, they weren't reading Margaret Sanger, they weren't reading anything intellectual, but they were reading Cosmo. They were reading, Vogue and all of these different kinds of things that really attract women. Magazines, women love magazines, and they've been virtually taken over by secularists. So my idea is really we can reach out to women with our own story, using our own images, using our own language. So it's been fun because, especially theology of home, who doesn't love talking about homes? I'm amazed at how many conversations I've had that have been struck up with people that don't have any faith, but they're kind of intrigued by the book because of the angle that it takes, where I'm explaining not how to decorate your home, but why we didn't want to decorate our homes. And it's, of course, a foreshadowing of heaven. That's what we want. So anyway, I think that this is a real challenge that we all have, is to sort of see, how do we talk about women in this way that's beautiful and compelling, instead of just always kind of defending ourselves? How do we put it out there to help people get off this freeway, so to speak, that we're on culturally, where we don't really have options to help them understand that there's a different way to think. Mm-hmm. So I've been digging a lot also into just what it means to be a woman, and kind of describing that and coming up with kind of a new language and grammar for women to wrap their minds around, because we spent so much time talking about how we relate to men, but we don't have enough about what's fundamentally feminine and beautiful in a compelling way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And so folks can go to theologyofhome.com. I see them both there, Theology of Home book, Theology of Home 2, The Spiritual Art of Homemaking. Before we hit our next break, can you take some time just to share with us, just to point us to our Blessed Mother and share some of the beauty and goodness of our Blessed Mother with us?
Yeah, well, I think this is really the key, is that she is this model. And I think there's so many desires that women have in their hearts naturally, but we sort of feel like, how do I relate to Mary? She was sinless, and this is a long time ago. Like, she feels very saccharine and one-dimensional. So in the second half of the Anti-Mary Exposed, I really go into how we can relate to her on these levels of desire that we have. The first one, of course, is that we want to be known and loved, and Our Lady exemplifies that in terms of just doing God's will and knowing God as her Father. And so she has this freedom and this joy and this deep love that comes through that I think we can relate to, and certainly I go into it much more deeply in the book. The second one is that we all want to do good, and you can see this even among people who have a very distorted idea of the good, is they're still trying, social justice warriors and all of this. People are trying to help other people. They just have a very distorted way of how that works. And this is, again, where Our Lady, everything that she has and is comes through God's will. And so this is why she has the capacity to do good and to be good. The closer that we mimic her, the more readily we're going to be able to mimic that. And it's the same pattern, of course, with the third desire of every woman's heart, and that's to be beautiful. This is one of those that's hard to say out loud, because it seems vain, or it seems like it's such a disordered desire, or people have just shoved it down deeply and don't think that it applies to them. But I think if you look at who Our Lady is, she, in every description of every apparition I've ever read, the person who saw her said, she's the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And that the beauty that she has is not an accident, and the beauty that women have is also not an accident. God has given that to us so that we can draw others to him, to his beauty, that we're meant to embody that. So you can see why that's such an amazingly awful thing that's happening to these trans girls, these girls that are undergoing surgeries and taking hormones to sort of to completely mutilate their bodies, is to take away that beauty. So anyway, I think it's one of those things that the more we come to know her, the more we realize that these desires that we have are embodied in her in this perfect way. And, all of it points us back to trying to find who God the Father is and have this relationship with him, so that we embody these things in ourselves the way that she does in her life and body.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You have another book entitled The Marian Option, God's Solution to a Civilization in Crisis. Can you give us a brief synopsis of that book? Is that something that is somewhat an answer or a complement to that popular book that was out for a time, The Benedict Option?
Yeah, no, this book was in response to that. I actually was doing some research and gave a talk on the Benedict Option, and all the things that Rod Dreher brought up that were problematic in culture and the world. He proposed St. Benedict, and of course I love St. Benedict, but I with all due respect, Our Lady has done it better in terms of whether it's evangelization or dealing with Islam, dealing with atheism, dealing with famine, disease, et cetera, et cetera. So the book was really a bird's eye, or is really a bird's eye look at the things that she's done throughout history. And it was just this great project to jump into, because the stories are amazing and they all weave together, and it's just incredible how much she has done to help Christians. And I think, it was a book to encourage us to see that she really is with us and wants to help us. We just have to ask.
Terrific. Well, that's all there at theologyofhome.com. When we do get back, I'm going to ask a little bit about something in an article that Dr. Gress wrote about the American patriarch and about really feminism's unexpected cure, and to really get at the heart of what that is all about, and to get at the true nature of men, the natural authority of men, real men, and the need that we have in this culture for men to really step up and be who they are called to be. You're listening to The Simple Truth. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
At the Station of the Cross, we understand that life circumstances can affect your giving options, whether by moving or by switching banks and credit card numbers. Please let us know if recent changes have been made to your payment information so that we can better serve you as you continue to bless us with your financial support. Update your information today at thestationofthecross.com or by calling 1-877-888-6279, extension 104.
As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent from your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported. The Station of the Cross thanks our supporters who have enabled us to broadcast Catholic programs for more than 20 years. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel message and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments. Thank you for your continued support, and may God bless you and your family.
Hi, this is Wayne Hepler, founder of the St. Thomas More House of Prayer. If you are looking for a way to grow closer to our Lord, I invite you to visit our Catholic Retreat Center dedicated to praying and promoting the Liturgy of the Hours. The rustic setting provides a quiet atmosphere for prayer and for learning about the public communal prayer of the Catholic Church, known as the Liturgy of the Hours. The 7 canonical hours are prayed throughout the day, beginning with the office of readings at 5:30 a.m. and ending with night prayer at 8 p.m. You are welcome to join in the prayer at any time or to book the house for a retreat. We are located at 365 Hill City Road in Cranberry, Pennsylvania. For more information or to book a visit, email info@liturgyofthehours.org or call the Retreat House at 814-676-1910. You can also learn more by visiting liturgyofthehours.org.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Carrie Gress, author of The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. You can find that book at tanbooks.com, also the theologyofhome.com. Dr. Gress, on your website, carriegress.com, the one article that is there entitled Feminism's Unexpected Cure, it lists what you describe as a feminist manifesto of sorts from 50 years ago. You made mention of it earlier in the show. You also listed in the introduction of your book, The Anti-Mary, but in the article, you also list a new litany which claims that the answer to restoring the culture and the family doesn't focus upon women at all, but starts with restoring what you say you deliberately called the American patriarch, by which you mean the natural authority of men, real men. You say the old litany, the Feminist Manifesto, was effective because it started by destroying the authority of men. Finally, you say that in rewriting the litany, you realized that the restoration of manhood was required, and with it, what would follow was the restoring of the women, the family, the culture. Can you unpack this some for us?
Yeah, no, I mean, was a really interesting reality that played out in my life. I knew about that litany that the feminist women had said, and at one point really started thinking about how do I get together a group of 12 women and kind of undo that prayer, litany, or whatever it was, that chant that they had been reciting over and over again. And, there was never really an opportunity for me to have 12 women together or to pull it together just with, kids and families and all of that. So then last year, my friends had a baby shower for me. I actually had a baby, and I was old enough. I had already given away all my baby things. And then sure enough, I was pregnant at 46. And my friends threw a shower for me, and it was amazing. It was a beautiful, incredible day. But as the shower was winding down, I realized that there were 12 women in the room. So I asked them quickly, I said, would you all be willing to pray this prayer with me? And of course, everybody was just really excited about the possibility. And so we ended up doing that. And but as I was rewriting it very quickly with my friend, I noticed just how much this destruction of the culture that they have been effective in doing was based on the fact that we were really after the patriarch, that if you can knock the patriarch out, then you get everything, kind of. And this is, you can see this in the language too, just still how blighted the patriarchy is, and what an awful word it is. So I was fascinated by it because, of course, I've been so focused on how do we cure women and help women. And, I realized that the very cornerstone really is men. We've got to help men understand this. So one of the things I've tried to do certainly is help diminish a lot of the angst and irritation that men often feel towards women, because they don't realize how much of this is just manipulation and sort of programmed into us because of the culture. How do we diffuse that? But on the flip side, we also obviously have to help women understand how they help the men in their lives be men and have and use the authority that God has given to them. So I think that that's really at the heart of it, is that recognizing that we have to let men be men. And there was a couple months ago, I was looking through this scripture commentary, and I was in Genesis, and I was reading about the natural order that God has set up, of course, with, there's God the Father, and then there's Adam, and then out of his rib comes Eve, who's his helpmate, and then from that they have dominion over the animals. Well, what happened with Eve, of course, was the exact opposite. You've got the animals, you've got the serpent who's telling Eve what to do, and then Eve tells Adam what to do, and then, of course, they're left without God. So I think that this is exactly what we're seeing in the culture today, is this, the demon is demons are feeding these ideas to women, and women have effectively silenced men by making the patriarchy such an evil thing. And so as a result, we have this godless, upside down culture that we're currently living in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Catechism of the Catholic Church 372, it says this: man and woman were made for each other, not that God left them half-made or incomplete. He created them to be a communion of persons in which each can be a helpmate to the other, for they are equal as persons and complementary as masculine and feminine. In marriage, God unites them in such a way that by forming one flesh, they can transmit human life, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. By transmitting human life to their descendants, man and woman as spouses and parents cooperate in a unique way in the Creator's work. There it is, beautiful vision for who we truly are, and to share the very life of God. The Catechism gets into that as well. But, all of this going back to the beginning here of 50, 60 years ago, and this radical feminism, and we get back to a perversion in sexual morality. A lot of that is encapsulated in what we see with the birth control pill first entering into culture. And so, we're so far down the road from this distortion of the true image of man and woman, and what marriage is truly meant to be, and what sexuality is really meant to be. Sex within marriage, that's what it's for. And so we're so far gone from this original and true vision of who we are. Any tips for us to say, okay, well, this seems like a really overwhelming task to say, how do we restore all of this? Anything when you think about it, I guess any explanation, any tips, any encouragement for us to not be overwhelmed, not be discouraged, but be encouraged to go forward and do what we can.
Right. No, I think that's a great question. And that's certainly the the reason why I wrote the Marian option is just to recognize how much Our Lady wants to help us. And she doesn't want to just help us in this sort of generic way, but she wants to be involved in our lives and bring all of us to her Son. And, she knows what it cost her Son to save us. So she's all the more interested in making sure that we can get to him, that we show that it was worth doing, that we don't squander that suffering that he went through. So I think that that's the beautiful thing too about recognizing Our Lady, is that she wants us to do it in a very unique way. Certainly what I'm called to do is very different than what you're called to do, and so on and so on with all Christians out there. But she knows why God created us. So when we trust her between Marian consecration and the Rosary, those are just the most incredible tools that we have to be able to get to that point where our lives become meaningful and fruitful. I think that that's a vital piece. The other thing is just even to recognize, that we are called to be fruitful and to live that out. And this is what was really the focus of my second book, Theology of Home too. Was to look at, the fact that women aren't called to be powerful or in control or to manipulate others. We're called to be fruitful. And I think that's there's a beautiful way to talk about this. And of course, sometimes we just can't wrap our minds around it because we don't have the language for it. And that's really what we did in the second book, was to try and help women understand what that means in a fresh way that feels compelling and applies to each of our lives. But yeah, I think that Our Lady offers us obviously this model, and she offers us the prayers and the avenue to get to that. But yeah, I think it certainly can become daunting. But we have this incredible church and all of these saints and models of the saints that we can follow, versus just getting so sucked up into the culture and feeling the weight of despair, or feeling like there's nothing we can do about it. I think we're all here for a reason, and drawing close to Our Lady makes that reason clearer and clearer every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the example of the fruitfulness of the books and the other options that you have there at theologyofhome.com, candles and all kinds of home goods, things like that. People can check out theologyofhome.com. It's a witness to us, right? There are steps we can take. Let's participate with God's grace and do that good that is before us. Thank you so much, Dr. Gress, for being on with us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, and I do want to recommend one other title that I see here, and that is a book that we have, and I didn't realize that it was you that wrote it, Marian Consecration for Children, another great option there at theologyofhome.com. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back at it tomorrow on The Simple Truth at 4 p.m. Eastern. God bless you.
St. Gregory Nazianzen said, "Give something